To quote his Hall of Fame bio, he was a power forward's worst nightmare, mastering the art of maneuvering around slower defenders, twisting and turning his body on the way to the basket. Smaller defenders were in for a long night as well, as Dantley was strong enough to post up players of all shapes and sizes. He was one of the craftiest scorers of his generation, leading the league in scoring twice and averaging at least 26 points for 7 years straight. But what was most impressive was that he put up all these numbers as a career 54% shooter at just 6'5". But his value started and ended with his scoring. He wasn't one to play consistent defense and developed a reputation as a selfish player who seldom got his teammates involved. He spent his best years on some mediocre Utah teams and pushed himself out of nearly every team he played on. He could never win a championship and didn't see many wins at all until the tail end of his career. And he always seemed to be the player that teams moved on from right before they became great. So Adrian Dantley definitely has some negatives attached to his name and his play style, but he's still one of a few of the great scorers of the 80s that barely get any recognition nowadays. So today's episode is going to recognize the Hall of Fame career of the original AD, Adrian Dantley. Let's jog your memory. Adrian Dantley began his basketball journey at DeMatha High School under Hall of Fame coach Morgan Wootten as a 6'4", 245-pound freshman. And throughout his high school career, he led DeMatha to a combined 117-7 record and was first team All-Met 3 times. As a junior, he led the Stags to a 30-1 record while averaging 28 points and 16 rebounds. And overall, the Stags would finish as the top locally ranked team each year that Dantley was there, and his commitment to the game was most evident on Christmas Day during his freshman season, when he went to Wooten's house to get the gym keys so he could go practice, which paid off, as he was first team All-American and Mr. Basketball USA as a senior, and would continue his career at the University of Notre Dame under coach Digger Phelps. A few years earlier, the Irish had pulled off a legendary victory when they defeated top-ranked UCLA in 1971, led by stars Austin Carr and Collis Jones. Dantley would join an Irish team led by John Shoemate and Gary Brokaw, where as a freshman, Dantley would be the team's second leading scorer and rebounder while shooting nearly 56%. And with the help of Dantley, Notre Dame would go 26-3 in the regular season, with no bigger accomplishment than Notre Dame's win on January 19th, when the undefeated top-ranked UCLA Bruins, led by Bill Walton and Jamaal Wilkes, came to town. The Bruins weren't just undefeated this season, they hadn't lost a game since their earlier mentioned loss to Notre Dame 3 years before, as they were on an 88-game winning streak, and it looked like it was about to be 89, as with about 3.5 minutes left in the game, the Bruins were up 70-59, but then Notre Dame would close the game on a 12-0 run, as they won by a single point, marking one of the biggest upsets in sports history. The Irish would begin the NCAA tournament with a victory over Austin Peay, with Dantley putting up 22 and 10, but would then lose to Michigan in the semifinal, as Dantley went 1 of 7 and scored just 2 points. They would close out the tourney with a victory over Vanderbilt in the Midwest Regional third-place game, as Dantley came back strong with 29 and 10 on 12 of 16 shooting, and as a freshman, he would average about 18.5 points, 9 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. Shoemate and Brokaw were gone going into the 75 season, making Dantley the team's leader, as Bill Paterno would be the only other player to average double figures. Notre Dame wouldn't find the same regular season success, as after starting 3-0, they would drop 3 straight, and after 12 games were 6-6, as overall they would finish the year at 16-8. However, Dantley had dominated, as he was the nation's second leading scorer, averaging over 30 points per game, while also pulling down 10 rebounds per game, and shooting over 54%. As he would have 17 games with at least 30, and 2 games with over 40, including a 49-point performance in a win versus Air Force. The Irish would enter the tournament with a first-round matchup versus Kansas, who they would defeat behind Dantley's game-high 33 points and 10 rebounds. But like last year, they would lose in the semifinal, this time to Maryland. However, Dantley had a great showing, with 25 and 11 on 55% shooting, but he would commit 9 turnovers. And this year, they would lose in the third place game, this time to Cincinnati, as Dantley would put up 34 on 10 of 15 shooting, but would also commit 8 turnovers. And for the regular season, he would average about 30 points, 10 rebounds, and 1.5 assists, as he was named a consensus first-team All-American. Dantley applied for the NBA draft and likely would have been a top pick, but he ultimately chose to rescind his name and return to Notre Dame for his junior year. And once again, he would dominate, as he was the 4th leading scorer in the nation, with Duck Williams being the only other player on the team to average double figures. The team also got some help from a freshman Bill Lambier. Dantley was again the team's top scorer and rebounder, had 13 games with at least 30, and was the team's top scorer in all but 2 games. Notre Dame started slow again, as they were 4-3 after 7 games, but would then win 16 of their final 18, and overall would finish the regular season at 20-5. They would defeat Cincinnati in the first round of the tournament, as Dantley had 27-8 on over 55% shooting, but would lose to Michigan in the semifinal, even though Dantley had a game-high 31 on over 63% shooting, but again would commit 7 turnovers. And the NCAA had done away with the third-place game, so that was the end of Notre Dame's season. And for the regular season, Dantley averaged about 28.5 points, 10 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game, as he was once again named a consensus first-team All-American and won the Oscar Robertson Trophy. And this time he would enter the NBA draft, where he would be drafted 6th overall by the Buffalo Braves. Dantley would be reunited with his former teammate and shoemate, but the Braves were led by All-Stars Randy Smith and Bob McAdoo. However, this wouldn't be the case for long. On December 9th, with the Braves sitting at 10-14, McAdoo was sent to the Knicks, as contract negotiations for the soon-to-be free agent had hit a standstill. But now the Braves were in need of scoring, and Dantley would fill that need, as he would finish as the team's second leading scorer as one of 2 players to average at least 20 points per game, and would do so on 52% shooting, as he would have double figures in 69 games, 12 games with at least 30, and 24 double-doubles. And he would also pull down a career-high 19 rebounds in the first game of his career, and his great season would see him named Rookie of the Year. However, the Braves felt the loss of McAdoo, as after going 46-36 and advancing to the second round of the playoffs in 76, they would go 30-52 and miss the playoffs this year. And for his rookie season, Dantley averaged about 20.5 points, 7.5 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. Dantley would also make history shortly before the start of the 78 season, but not the kind of history you'd expect. On September 1st, Dantley was traded to the Indiana Pacers for Billy Knight, who had been the second leading scorer in the league last year. And this trade marked the first time in NBA history that a reigning Rookie of the Year was traded the following season. Dantley picked up where he left off, as he began the year as the Pacers' leading scorer and was sitting as the 3rd best scorer in the league after 24 games. But then on December 13th, with the Pacers sitting at 10-14, Dantley was included in a package sent to the Lakers, for a package headlined by big man James Edwards, as Pacers coach Bob Leonard would say that you can't win in the NBA without a big man in the middle. But the Lakers were also in need of help, as they had just lost forward Kermit Washington to suspension after he seriously injured the Rockets' Rudy Tomjanovich with a punch during a December 9th game versus Houston, and Washington would eventually be traded to Boston. So now the Lakers, who were led by superstar Kareem Abdul Jabbar, had a high-scoring small forward, who they would need to figure out how to pair with another good small forward in Jamaal Wilkes. The 10-16 Lakers would go 35-21 the rest of the way, to finish at 45-37. Overall this year, Dantley would hit double figures in 76 games and have at least 30 in 15 games, while shooting over 51%. His scoring would drop in LA, but that's to be expected when you're playing with a top 5 scorer in the league. The Lakers would get the Sonics in round 1, but would lose the series in 3 games, as Dantley ranked in the top 3 in all major statistical categories for the Lakers, including a team-leading 57.1% shooting. However, the Sonics were just the better team, and for the regular season, Dantley averaged about 21.5 points, 8 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. Dantley would still be a Laker during the 79 season. However, it was a step back, as injuries limited him to just 60 games, and he was 3rd on the team in scoring, averaging less than 20 points for the first time in his young career. However, he would still hit double figures in 46 games, and record his first career 40-point game in a November 3rd win versus New York, as he again shot over 50% this year. With Dantley in the lineup, the team went 37-23, and without him, they went 10-12. But with Dantley missing time, it gave Wilkes an opportunity to show his ability, which he did as the team's second leading scorer on over 50% shooting. The Lakers would enter the playoffs with a first-round matchup versus Denver, who they would defeat in a close 3-game series, with Abdul Jabbar, Dantley, and Wilkes combining for over 70 points per game. And Dantley played especially well, as he tied for second on the team with 22 points on over 68% shooting, and did this in only about 26 minutes per game, as he was coming off the bench. And he would have at least 25 in the Lakers' 2 wins. Round 2 brought a rematch with Seattle, but once again the Lakers lost, this time in 5 games. Dantley continued to come off the bench, but didn't have the same impact, averaging 15 points on about 47% shooting. And for the regular season, he averaged about 17.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. During the offseason, the Lakers would draft a player who, along with Larry Bird, is credited for saving the NBA, and it seemed like a championship was in Dantley's future. But on September 14th, Dantley would be traded to his fourth team in as many years, when the Lakers sent him to Utah for Spencer Haywood, as the Lakers decided to commit to Wilkes. But it would be in Utah where Dantley would reach his full potential. He would join a team led by Pete Maravich, whose career was winding down due to severe knee problems. Maravich would spend a lot of time on the bench this year, as his knee issues often prevented him from practicing. And new Jazz head coach Tom Nisalke had a rule that players who didn't practice didn't play. Additionally, less than 3 weeks after the Dantley trade, the Jazz traded for the Nets' Bernard King, who had averaged at least 21 points in each of his first 2 seasons. But he also would barely play, as substance abuse issues kept him in and out of rehab, as he appeared in just 19 games and averaged less than 10 points. So Dantley had to play like a star, and he did. Although the Jazz had the worst scoring offense, they did feature the league's third best scorer, as Dantley would average 28 points on over 57% shooting, which was also good for fourth in the league. He played 68 games, but would hit double figures in every game, and have 32 games with at least 30, and his first career 50-point game on 21 of 27 from the field in a November 27th loss to the Lakers, as he would ultimately be voted to his first career All-Star game. But with their other top players missing so much time, the Jazz would go just 24-58 and miss the playoffs. And for his first year in Utah, Dantley averaged about 28 points, 7.5 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. Going into 81, Maravich and King were gone, but Dantley wasn't without help, as the Jazz had drafted shooting guard Daryl Dr. Duncanstein Griffith and had signed point guard Ricky Green, as these three would define the Jazz for the majority of the 80s. Green would only play 47 games this year, but Griffith would play 81, averaging over 20 per game as he was named Rookie of the Year. But that was nothing compared to what Dantley did. At age 25, he would record his first season averaging at least 30 a game, as his 30.7 points would be a career high and the top scoring mark in the league. He would play 80 games, hitting double figures in every game, putting up at least 30 in 45 games, and would even have 3 games with at least 50, while finishing with the 7th best shooting average in the league at nearly 56%. He would play a league-leading 42.7 minutes per game, and his 632 made free throws would also be tops in the league, as he averaged a career-high 11.3 free throw attempts per game, as he would make his second straight All-Star appearance, as well as a second-team All-NBA selection. But even with Dantley and Griffith combining for over 50 points per game, the Jazz still had one of the worst offenses in the league, as they finished at 28-54, and for the regular season, Dantley would average about 30.5 points, 6.5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. The 82 Jazz would get at least 80 games out of Green, Griffith, and Dantley, as the three would combine for nearly 65 points per game. Dantley would again put up over 30 per game to finish third in the league, and his 57% shooting would be 6th in the league. He would hit double figures in all but one game, have 46 games with at least 30, and a 53-point game in an April 10th win versus Denver. He would finish second in minutes played, and again lead the league in made free throws with 648. However, he would also tie for the league lead in turnovers with nearly 300. However, a healthy Jazz trio would propel Utah to the 7th best scoring offense in the NBA, but they would also have the 2nd worst scoring defense, and they still weren't winning. So after an 8-12 start, Utah GM Frank Layden took over as head coach, but he wouldn't have much success this year, as he went 17-45 the rest of the way to finish at 25-57. And for the regular season, Dantley averaged about 30.5 points, 6.5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game, while earning his 3rd straight All-Star appearance. During the offseason, the Jazz had selected Georgia's Dominique Wilkins with the 3rd overall pick, but because of Dantley occupying the small forward position, they wanted Wilkins to play power forward, which he didn't want to do and would refuse to play in Utah, so the Jazz would end up trading him to Atlanta in what became one of the most lopsided trades in NBA history. The 83 season was shaping up to be Dantley's best. After 22 games, he was averaging 30.7 points on 58% shooting, and even dropped a career-high 57 points on 20 of 27 from the field in a December 4th win versus Chicago, and he wasn't even 100% in that game, as on November 26th, he had fallen on his wrist during a game versus Boston, which would continue to bother him until he re-aggravated it in a December 17th game versus San Antonio, and it was later determined that he had torn a ligament, and this would ultimately lead to him being shut down for the rest of the year. The Jazz were just 9-13 at the time of the injury, and would go 21-39 the rest of the way to finish at 30-52. And for his shortened season, Dantley would average about 30.5 points, 6.5 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. Dantley was good to go for 84, which would end up being the most successful of his time in Utah. Dantley would put up over 30 per game for the 4th consecutive season, as he and Griffith combined for over 50 per game, while Green would lead the league in steals and receive his only All-Star selection. Dantley would again be the league's top scorer while shooting nearly 56%. He would make a league-leading 813 free throws, while making at least 10 trips to the line for the 5th straight season. He would hit double figures in every game, including 10 games with at least 40. He would make his return to the All-Star game and earned his second and final second-team All-NBA selection. And after such a great return year, he would be voted Comeback Player of the Year. But the bigger news was that the Jazz were winning. They went into the All-Star break with the 3rd best record in the league at 27-16, but would go 18-21 the rest of the way, behind a top 5 scoring offense. But their 45-37 record got them a first-round matchup with Denver, who featured 2 of the top 5 scorers in the league, in Alex English and Kiki Vandeweghe. This would be a high-scoring series that saw English, Vandeweghe, and Dan Issel all put up over 25 a game. But Dantley would be the series' best scorer, as he averaged 31 a game on over 52% shooting, including 30 and 12 in the series-clinching Game 5 win, as the Jazz moved on to the second round with a matchup against Phoenix. Dantley would again dominate with over 33 a game on nearly 49% shooting, including his postseason career high of 46 on over 59% shooting in Game 5 to help Utah stay alive. But Game 6 would be his worst, as he put up 23 points on 8 of 22 shooting in a Jazz loss which ended their season. And for the regular season, Dantley averaged about 30.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. During the summer leading up to the 85 season, the Jazz would draft a point guard out of Gonzaga, who would go on to become one of the greatest players of all time. The Jazz were really starting to put some pieces together, as Stockton would be a solid backup for the team, Griffith would have his best year, and the Jazz had a good perimeter defender in Green, and a great interior defender in Defensive Player of the Year, Mark Eaton. But part of the reason Griffith had such a good year was due to Dantley missing 27 games after breaking his toe early in the season. Nonetheless, he was still the team's top scorer on over 53% shooting, and his 26.6 points per game was good for 7th in the league, and he would still record 4 games with at least 40, as he would again be voted to the All-Star game. The Jazz would go 28-27 with Dantley in the lineup, and 13-14 without him, to finish at 41-41 and begin the playoffs with a matchup versus Houston. Dantley would start strong with 34-9 in Game 1, and overall would have at least 20 in 4 out of the 5 games. But he would shoot below 38% in Games 2 and 5. However, the Jazz would outlast the Rockets and take the series in 5 games. Round 2 brought Denver, who were ready this year, as they would win the series in 5 games. Dantley would put up about 26 per game on over 59% shooting, but Alex English countered that with over 30 a game. And for the regular season, Dantley averaged about 26.5 points, 6 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. The Jazz added another piece through the 85 draft, who along with Stockton would usher in a new era of Jazz basketball. But not yet, as Dantley was still the team's star. But the team was missing a key player this year, as Griffith would miss the entire season with a stress fracture in his foot. So without his scoring, Dantley had to step up, and would again lead the team in scoring, with young forwards Karl Malone and Thurl Bailey acting as the second and third leading scorers. Dantley would also finish as the league's second leading scorer, and his 56.3% shooting would be good for 8th in the league, and he would again lead the league with 630 made free throws on his final season of making over 10 trips to the line per game. He would also receive the final All-Star selection of his career. The Jazz were again a middle-of-the-pack team and would finish at 42-40, which would be good enough for a first-round playoff matchup versus Dallas. However, they would be without their star, as Dantley had been dealing with back spasms this season, which would lead to him sitting out the entire first-round series, which would end in a 4-game loss for Utah. And it was at this time that the conflict between Layden and Dantley would be made very public, as Layden openly expressed his doubt that Dantley's back problems were bad enough to keep him from playing, and would say that he would gladly welcome a trade for Dantley, but that no teams were interested. And it didn't help Dantley's trade value when Layden would say that aside from his good production, he was a moody player, and that Layden didn't have the time or patience to deal with his ups and downs, in addition to feeling like his agents and all agents were becoming too involved. But his regular season saw him average about 30 points, 5 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. Well, it turns out Layden would get his wish, as a trade was orchestrated with the Pistons during the offseason to send Dantley to Detroit. The Pistons were a team on the rise and felt that bringing in a veteran go-to scorer like Dantley could be the move to put them over the top, as he joined the star backcourt of Isiah Thomas and Joe Dumars, as well as tough big man Bill Laimbeer, while the bench featured great talent like big man Rick Mahorn, sixth man Vinny the Microwave Johnson, and a rookie small forward named Dennis Rodman. But Dantley was in unfamiliar territory. No longer was he the clear-cut best player on a bad team that needed him to dominate the ball in order to be competitive, as after taking at least 18 shots per game in each season in Utah, he averaged 13.9 per game during his first year in Detroit. But although his scoring would drop considerably, he remained the team's leading scorer on over 53% shooting, as he and Thomas would combine for over 42 a game. He would still hit double figures in 77 games and have 12 games with at least 30. But it would also be in Detroit that he would earn a less flattering nickname of the Black Hole, as once you threw the ball to him, usually in the post, you weren't going to see the ball again. And even though his ball-stopping play would eventually push him out of Detroit, it was working for now, as the Pistons recorded their first 50-win season in 14 years with a 52-30 record, and entered the playoffs with a first-round matchup versus Washington. This would end in a pretty easy sweep for Detroit, as Dantley tied for the team lead in scoring while shooting over 62%. Round 2 would bring the Hawks, and although Detroit would win in 5 games, this would be a terrible series for Dantley. He would still be the team's second leading scorer, but would put up less than 16 points on less than 42% shooting, as he would shoot under 39% in each of the first 3 games. But the Pistons were through to the conference finals versus the defending champion Boston Celtics, and this would be a great 7-game series. Thomas would struggle, shooting less than 43%, but Dantley would lead the team with close to 24 points per game on over 57% shooting, as he would also shoot 60 free throws. He would have at least 24 in 5 of 7 games, including a game-high 32 in Game 4. But this series is most remembered for Isiah Thomas's blunder in Game 5. The Celtics had won the first 2 games, but the Pistons even up the series. Then in Game 5, with about 5 seconds left and the Pistons holding a 1-point lead, Detroit gained possession and just had to get an inbounds pass in, then hit a couple of free throws to all but seal the victory. However, with many expecting Thomas and Detroit to call a timeout, he would rush an inbounds pass, which led to a Larry Bird steal and Dennis Johnson layup to give Boston the win. Detroit would come back to win Game 6, but would then lose Game 7. However, they ended this game without Dantley. In the final minute of the third quarter, Dantley and Johnson hit heads when diving for a loose ball, which left Dantley unconscious with a concussion, knocking him out of the final quarter, which was huge, as he had already put up 18 points, and Boston had been sending double teams at him all series. So with him gone, they were able to man up on Detroit and would ultimately win the game by 3 points, ending Detroit's season. But for his first season in Detroit, he averaged about 21.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. The Pistons brought back all their key pieces for 88, and Dantley would again lead the team in scoring, as this would be the final season of his career averaging at least 20 per game, and the final year of his career shooting at least 50%. He would miss 13 games this season, but still hit double figures in 64 games, including 45 points on 13 of 17 shooting in a November 21st win versus Chicago. The Pistons were again an elite team and got a much improved season from a second-year Rodman, who was starting to cut into Dantley's minutes. The Pistons would get another first-round series versus Washington, who they would defeat in 5 games. Dantley would be one of 2 20-point scorers on the team, and would do so on over 53% shooting. Round 2 would bring the Bulls, who the Pistons would defeat in 5 games. Dantley was again the team's second leading scorer on an efficient 50% shooting, as Thomas struggled, shooting about 40% and committing nearly 4 turnovers per game. The conference finals brought a rematch with Boston, and this series would go much better for Detroit. The teams would trade wins in the first 4 games before Detroit took games 5 and 6 to punch their ticket to the NBA Finals. Thomas would play better with 23 points on about 45% shooting, but would again struggle with taking care of the ball, as he averaged more than 4 turnovers per game. Dantley would put up about 17 a game on just over 48% shooting, but would struggle from the free throw line, as although he led all Pistons with 41 trips to the line, he shot just over 68%. The NBA Finals brought the Lakers, and Dantley couldn't have started any better, as in a Game 1 win, he had a game-high 34 on 14 of 16 shooting, as he would be the Pistons' top scorer this series with over 21 per game, as Thomas was again struggling, as in the first 5 games, he scored at least 20 points just once, and shot above 38% just once. However, he would have one of the most memorable games in finals history during Game 6, as during the third quarter, he would severely sprain his ankle, and then after leaving the game, he would return to score an NBA Finals record 25 points in the third quarter, and overall would have 43 in the game. But the Lakers would win by a single point after late game free throws from Kareem. Thomas tried to play through the pain in Game 7, but could only manage 28 minutes and 10 points, as the Lakers won the title. Overall, Dantley would have 4 games with less than 20, which would all be Detroit losses, but would score at least 25 in the 3 Piston wins. And for the regular season, he would average about 20 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. 89 would be messy for Detroit and Dantley. He began the year as a Piston and was playing his usual efficient basketball, putting up about 18.5 points on over 52% shooting. But his usage continued to drop, and it was clear that head coach Chuck Daly wanted to use Rodman, especially for his defensive ability, which Dantley wasn't happy about. And it was clear that his days in Detroit were numbered during a game versus Boston, when Dantley refused to come out and would get in a shouting match with Daly on the court. And Dantley further alienated himself during a team meeting, when he confronted Thomas, and would later say that even though Thomas wanted the Pistons to be his team, Dantley wouldn't accept that. And Dantley would also say that Thomas had asked management to get rid of him, and whether this was true or not, it happened on February 16th. Dantley was traded to the Dallas Mavericks for their star scorer Mark Aguirre, and it didn't help put to rest any rumors that Thomas had a role in the trade, with Detroit acquiring one of his best friends in Aguirre. But Dantley had now gone from a championship contender to a team on the decline in Dallas, as a 33-year-old Dantley joined a 26-21 Mavs team who were led by the longtime backcourt of Rolando Blackman and Derek Harper. Dantley would play 31 games for Dallas and would up his scoring to about 20 a game to lead the team, but would only shoot about 46%. But the Dantley trade didn't help Dallas, as after acquiring him they went 12-23 and missed the playoffs. And for the regular season, he averaged about 19 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Going into 1990, the Mavs were optimistic about what a full season with Dantley could look like, but they wouldn't quite get that. His minutes and usage were continuing to drop, as he averaged less than 30 minutes per game for the first time in over a decade, and would take less than 11 shots per game, as he had dropped to 5th on the team in scoring. But on February 3rd, during a game versus the Blazers, his season would come to an end after he broke his fibula. The Mavs were 24-22 at the time of the injury, but would play better without Dantley, as they would go 23-12 and make the playoffs. However, Dantley was still not available, as Dallas was swept. And for the regular season, he would put up about 14.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. But on May 2nd, he would be released by Dallas. Dantley didn't have any suitors during the offseason and would be without a team for most of 91. But after a late season injury to Dale Ellis, the Milwaukee Bucks would sign Dantley for the rest of the year and the playoffs. He would play 13 regular season games, with his best game coming on April 16th, when he had 16 points versus Washington in a bench role. He would suit up for all 3 of Milwaukee's playoff games, but would play very limited minutes, as he scored 5 total points in a first-round loss to Philadelphia. And for his brief regular season, it would see him average about 5.5 points, 1.5 rebounds, and an assist per game. Dantley was again a free agent, and without any NBA offers, he would spend the 92 season in an Italian league, averaging nearly 27 per game. But this would be his final season of professional basketball. Adrian Dantley put in one of the most efficient offensive careers of all time, and doing so at his size made it that much more impressive. A lot of the knocks on him have their validity, like him being one-dimensional, not having interest in playing defense, and being selfish, but his ability to put the ball in the basket was second to none. When Dantley left the game, his 23,177 points was 9th all-time. He was 5th all-time with 6,832 made free throws, and his 24.3 points per game average still ranks top 25 all-time. He played on bad teams during his career, but it seems that he was also more concerned about getting his points than doing what was best for winning. But a lot of times in Utah, him scoring as much as possible is what was best for winning. And he definitely believed that he needed to score for his team to win. His ego got in the way of him winning a ring in Detroit, as that 89 team likely still wins if he just accepts a lesser role. But instead he goes down as another great player who couldn't win it all. But if you tried to go point for point with Adrian Dantley throughout the 80s, it was almost a guarantee you were going to end up on the losing end. But that's it for today's episode on Adrian Dantley. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on his brief Milwaukee teammate, or this one on a fellow Notre Dame alum. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.